president of the Brighton Historical Society, and we are excited to have y'all here tonight, and we are really excited to have the pleasure of introducing someone that you might have been hearing about lately. Among other honors, she recently won the National Daughters of the American Revolution Women in American History Award. Her name is Dr. Nancy Hendricks, and she has been known to bring people like Senator Harry Caraway of Arkansas back from the dead. Nancy is an award-winning author whose books include Senator Harry Caraway, Hattie Caraway, and Arkansas Legacy, and her latest, Terrible Swift Sword, Long Road to the Sultana. Nancy performs nationwide in her program, Hattie to Hillary, Women in Politics. But this year, she is bringing someone else back to life from 150 years ago, telling a story few people know. Please help me welcome our visitor from the past.
Good evening. Well, thank you all for being here tonight. I regret it does take a while to move to the front of the room. My name is Lydia Owen Dodd. I'm the mother of David Owen Dodd, and I'd like to share his story with you this evening. You see, it will only be what little we do know. Oh, there was a friend's recollection here or a stranger's information there. What we know came to us in bits and pieces. All that Christmas of 1863, how we waited in Camden for his return, how we waited and waited in vain. Finally, in desperation, David's father took off after him to try to retrace his steps. Those steps led to the gallows. What little we know came, as I said, from others, how he danced with a young girl at a party. And we understand that General Steele offered him his life in return for the name of his informer. But the rest still comes to us in bits and pieces, and I struggle with the burden that his fate was somehow my fault, that in trying to save my beloved son, it was I who condemned him to his fate. Perhaps we all forgot that he was only 17 when that most uncivil war came in 1861. David, like so many others, quickly began to seem much older than his years. Well, as I said, I was Lydia Owen, as was. I married Andrew Dodd, who, well, was firmly of the merchant class, except that he never quite found that business success he had hoped for. We moved around. David was born in Lavaca County, Texas, but finally we moved back here to Arkansas, between Little Rock and Benton. And some of you may remember that area we moved to, which was full of Dodd and Owen relatives, was called Owens Township. Today it's called Bryant, Arkansas. David was so proud to go to school in Little Rock. He went to St. John's Academy and loved his schooling and planned to do so much with his life. But he came down with malaria and he had to leave school, but he always hoped and prayed and planned that he would go back. When the war came in 1861, David had taken a job in Little Rock as a store clerk. Finally, David and his father went to Monroe, Louisiana, where his father could work as a sutler or a provider of supplies for the armies. It was there in Monroe that David learned Morse code at the telegraph office, and he had his one and only photograph taken. My daughter and I remained in Little Rock during September of 1863 when the Union Army took over the city. Father sent David from Monroe to Little Rock to fetch us. We found passage on a boat on the Arkansas River, David, myself, and his sister. But you see, the boat was full of Federal soldiers, and when you combine a hot-blooded 17-year-old Confederate boy with a lot of soldiers, he felt that he had to protect his mother and sister, and I feared for what I thought might come. and I decided to leave that boat and return to Little Rock. And I must live with the thought that in trying to save David, I may have been responsible for his fate. Finally, his father had to leave Monroe and come to Little Rock himself to fetch us. Did David feel that he had failed? Father took us to Camden, which was Confederate headquarters in Arkansas, but he wanted to finish up some business dealings in Little Rock, and he felt it was safer to let David return to the town since David was under the age for the military. Did David want to redeem himself in his father's eyes? David went to Confederate General Fagan to pat a pass through the lines, and in what may or may not have been a joke, General Fagan said, "I will expect a full report upon your return." Did David take that seriously? The day before Christmas of 1863, David took a mule to Little Rock. He carried his birth certificate attesting to his being underage for the Army. He stayed with his aunt, Susan Owen, and was invited to the best holiday parties in Little Rock. He was one of the few good-looking and eligible young men left in town. At one party, he met an old school friend from St. John's, a school friend who was now dashing in the uniform of a Confederate courier. Did David see a vision of himself? He was invited to the home of a Dr. R.L. Dodge, who came from Vermont. Dr. Dodge had a very lovely 17-year-old daughter, Mary Dodge. Mary was described, even though she was from Vermont, as an ardent little rebel. Union officers were quartered in their home as Union soldiers took over the city and could pretty much stay wherever they wanted to. At one party, David was invited and saw their attentions to this young teenage girl. Did David resent his flirtations to her? But David even knew some of the officers from his days as a clerk, so perhaps they all felt very comfortable in speaking freely. David left Little Rock on the Benton Road to return to Camden on December 29th. He passed Union sentries who took his pass because David did not think he'd be coming back. He went to spend his night with his uncle, Washington Dodd, in this part of the country, southwest of Little Rock. But the next morning, instead of going back and keeping going from his uncle's house the way he came in, he detoured through the woods towards Benton. And the detour took him back across Union lines. Why did he go another way? Did he mean to take a shortcut? Was he lost? Were the lines just so helplessly, hopelessly drawn that it was simply a mistake? But when Union sentries encountered him, he had no pass to give them. He said he had already given it to one Union soldier, which was true. They went to find that Union soldier, but as fate would have it, he had been taken off duty. They asked David for some identification other than that birth certificate. He pulled out a little leather notebook. And in that notebook were strange dots and dashes, and in the small notebook that most people would not know what they were. But one officer had worked for the telegraph office. In fact, after the war, he became president of the Western Union Company. He could easily read the Morse code, and he knew it was exact information about Union troop strength in Little Rock. They arrested David and took him to the military prison in Little Rock, the site of today's state capitol. There a court-martial was held, and it was voted 4-2 to convict him of being a spy. The crime was treason. The sentence, execution by hanging. David was taken to the Little Rock Arsenal, the site of today's MacArthur Park. But the aristocratic ladies, as well as our family members in Little Rock, pleaded for mercy. General Frederick Steele was not an evil man. In fact, he'd been accused by federal officials of being too lenient on the people of Little Rock. But he said he could not overturn the verdict of the court-martial. Some said later that he offered David his release in exchange for the name of his reformer, but David refused, and in words that have come down to us today, he said, "I can give my life for my country, but I cannot betray a friend." What David didn't know was that that friend might already have been gone. Dr. Dodge and his daughter Mary Dodge were put on a federal gunboat and sent back to Vermont for the duration of the war. And so General Steele already had his suspicions. So I must ask myself, was David's loyalty in vain? General Steele had a gallows built behind the arsenal, again, ironically, on the grounds of St. John's School, where David had so hoped to return. Certainly not in this way. On January 8th of 1864, a bitterly cold day when the Arkansas River was frozen solid, David was put in a wagon and was made to ride sitting on his own coffin, but still he did not yield. They removed his coat and put the noose around his neck, and still he did not yield. The officer in charge of the execution found that they did not have a blindfold, as required by military law. David merely nodded to his coat and said, "There's a handkerchief in my pocket." And those were his last words. "There's a handkerchief in my pocket." A gentleman, or rather a gentle boy,